Benin City hangs heavy, thick with the scent of rain-soaked earth and the memory of empires. It is a place where the past is not a foreign country but a next-door neighbor, its voice a low hum in the blood of its people. In this ancient kingdom, where the Obus Palace stands as a testament to centuries of lineage and power, a family's history was about to crack open like dry ground in the Harmattan, the fissures reaching deep into the modern cities of Wari and Lagos. This is a story of that crack, a tale of inheritance and its shadow, of truth buried so deep it festers, and it begins not with a birth, but with a death. My name is Osiro, and I am the reluctant keeper of this family's story. I grew up in the labyrinthine streets of Lagos, in the sprawling, chaotic heart of Akate, where the roar of Danfo buses and the chatter of traders drown out the quieter ghosts. But the ghosts of Benin always found me, carried in the voices of my elders, in the particular way my mother cooked owo soup, in the heavy silences that fell over family gatherings when certain names were mentioned. Austin's name was one of them. Mako's name was another. And the silence between them was a chasm, a no man's land filled with the unspoken. To understand the rift, you must first understand our patriarch, my grandfather, Chief Eredi Awa. In his prime, he was a man of formidable presence, a surveyor whose work had mapped the very land upon which New Nigeria was being built. He had two sons, my uncle, Ifosa, the elder, a thoughtful man with the soul of a scholar who preferred the quiet company of books to the boisterous politics of the family, and my uncle, Ziko, the younger, a man of immense charm and restless energy, a trader whose ambitions stretched from the markets of Benin to the creeks of Wari and the ports of Lagos. They were brothers, but they were also sun and moon, their orbits distinct, their light different. Ziko was the adventurer. He fell in love with the riverine world of Wari, a city built on oil and water, where the creeks whispered secrets of fortune and loss. It was there he met Izu, a woman of striking beauty and quiet resilience, whose family had navigated those same creeks for generations. Their marriage was a merging of two worlds, the solid, rooted Benin aristocracy and the fluid, pragmatic spirit of the riverine people. They were happy, but their happiness was a fragile boat on those busy waters. A year into their marriage, a year filled with the promise of a child, Ziko's life was cut short by a sudden, virulent illness that swept through the creeks. He died before he could see his son born, leaving Izu a widow, pregnant and adrift. It was Ifosa, the quiet scholar, who stepped into the breach. Bound by a duty deeper than law, a duty etched into the very marrow of our culture, he did what was expected. He married Izu. This was not a love match, not in the romantic sense, but an act of preservation. He took his brother's wife and the unborn child into his protection, giving them his name, his home, his stability. The child, a boy, was born and named Mako. By every custom of the land, by the tradition that had held our people together for centuries, Mako was Ifosa's son. The circumstances of his conception, the ghost of Ziko that hung over his arrival, was a story to be whispered only in the most private of moments, a bittersweet truth buried for the sake of family cohesion. And for a time, it worked. Ifosa raised Mako as his own, a quiet, introspective boy who seemed to have inherited his official father's love for quiet contemplation. The family moved from Wari back to the heart of Benin, to the sprawling family compound where the air was thick with the scent of palm oil and the sound of prayers. Life fell into a rhythm. The ghost of Ziko, if he lingered, did so silently. Then, 2 years after Mako's birth, Izu gave Ifosa a son of his own blood. They named him Austin. Austin was everything Mako was not. Where Mako was thoughtful, Austin was bold. Where Mako observed, Austin acted. He was his father's son in a way that was immediately, undeniably visible. He had Ifosa's energy, his drive, a spark that Mako, for all his quiet intelligence, seemed to lack. He was the son everyone had expected Ifosa to have, and his arrival shifted the unspoken dynamics of the household. The love Ifosa had for both boys was, I believe, genuine. But a father's heart is a complex organ, and the pride he felt in Austin, his biological heir, his legacy made flesh, was a powerful current. It didn't mean he loved Mako less, but it meant he loved Austin, differently. More openly. More possessively. Mako, sensitive and aware, must have felt the subtle shift, the way his father's eyes would light up with a special pride when Austin built a perfect toy truck from scrap metal, the way his stories of school were listened to with a keener interest. He grew into a young man with a permanent sense of being slightly outside, of belonging to the story that was told but not the one that was lived. He was the eldest son, yes, but the shadow of his true paternity, the secret everyone knew and no one spoke, began to stretch longer. As the years passed, Efosa's health began to fail. It was a slow, inexorable decline, like the retreat of the tide. And as his strength waned, the question that had lain dormant for so long began to stir, a serpent waking in the sun. The question of inheritance. Efosa was a man of significant means. There was the sprawling family house in Benin, the valuable plots of land in Irwa, a town whose red earth held the bones of our ancestors, and a burgeoning portfolio of properties in Akate, Lagos, purchased years ago when the swampy land was considered a fool's gamble and now worth a king's ransom. Who would inherit the fruits of his labor? In our tradition, the answer should have been clear. The first son inherits the father. Mako was the first son. But tradition is a river with many currents. There is the written law, there is the custom of the land, and then there is the deepest current of all, the will of the father. And a father's will, especially when whispered from a sickbed, can carve new channels through the oldest bedrock. The unspoken truth, the secret of Mako's birth, began to press against the walls of the family home in Benin. It was no longer just a sad story, it was now a key that could unlock or lock a vast inheritance. The fear began to set in, a cold, creeping thing. It was not just fear of what Efosa might decide, but a deeper, more ancient terror. This secret was tied to the dead. Zako's spirit, it was murmured, had never been properly settled. His son, raised by his brother, belonged to him in the spiritual realm. To deny that, to give Zako's son the inheritance of Efosa, might invite the ancestors' anger. But to deny Efosa's blood son, Austin, his birthright, was to fracture the family in the world of the living. The elders, the custodians of truth, became masters of evasion. Aunts and uncles who knew the full story began to choose their words with the care of a bomb disposal expert. Everyone was scared to say the truth. They were not just scared of causing a quarrel, they were scared of the consequences they could not see, the spiritual backlash, the ancestral ire. They were, in a very real way, afraid of death, the death of the family, the death of favor, the metaphysical death that comes from angering the forces that bind the living to the departed. And so, the stage was set for a war. Not a war of armies on sunlit fields, but a war of whispers in darkened rooms, of legal documents drafted in the hushed offices of Lagos lawyers, of silent accusations and bitter resentments that festered in the humid air of Benin. It was our own war of the roses, fought not with white and red roses, but with the deep purple of the royal Benin cloth and the muddy red of Irwa earth. On one side stood Mako, the quiet first son, his claim rooted in tradition and the public story of his life, but haunted by the ghost of his real father. On the other side stood Austin, the vibrant younger son, his claim rooted in blood and the private affections of his father, but threatened by a custom that predated those affections. And in the middle, silent and terrified, stood the rest of us, the family, watching as the truth we had buried for so long began to claw its way to the surface, demanding to be heard, promising to destroy everything in its path. This is where our story truly begins. The death of Efosa was not a sudden thunderclap but the slow, inevitable extinguishing of a lamp whose oil had long run dry. For months, his bed in the old family house in Benin City had become the center of the universe, a gravity well drawing in worried relatives, whispered consultations with native doctors, and the hollow comforts of hospital corridors. When the end finally came on a humid Thursday morning, with the harmattan winds just beginning to stir dust devils in the red earth streets, the grief was genuine but layered. Beneath the wailing of the women, beneath the solemn faces of the men, another current flowed, a river of anxiety, of unasked questions, of a reckoning long deferred. My phone rang at my apartment in Acate, Lagos, at 4:17 a.m. It was my mother, her voice a tight wire of controlled emotion. "Osiro, your uncle has gone home." In our parlance, there was no need for names. There was only one uncle whose departure could silence a city. "Come immediately. There are things that must be decided." The journey from Lagos to Benin is usually a pilgrimage of patience, a 5-hour crawl through the sprawl of industrial towns and lush farmlands. That day, it felt like a descent into another century. As the battered luxury bus lurched past the palm plantations and roadside stalls selling roasted plantain, I thought about Efosa. I thought about his library, a dim, dusty room in the Benin house where he would spend hours, emerging only to eat or to settle a dispute with the quiet authority of a man who had read enough to know that most arguments were just echoes of older ones. I thought about how he looked at Austin, that spark of pride, and how he looked at Mako, with something more complicated, love, certainly, but love tinged with the awareness of a promise made to a ghost. And I thought about the question no one had dared ask him as he lay dying: who will lift the earth? In Benin tradition, the funeral of a great man is not merely a ceremony, it is a transfer of power. The person who performs the final rites, who pours the libation, who shaves their head, who inherits the title and the responsibilities, that person is the successor. It is the ultimate public declaration of lineage. For Efosa, a first son himself, the expectation was carved in stone: his first son would perform the rites. But which son was first? And what was a son, truly? The compound in Benin City, when I arrived, was a churning sea of black and white. Women in uniform wrapper and blouses sat in clusters, their wails rising and falling in practiced, mournful cadences. Men gathered under the mango tree at the center of the compound, their voices low, their eyes watchful. The air was thick with the smell of palm oil, burning kerosene, and the sweet, cloying scent of flowers already wilting in the heat. And beneath it all, the thing no one would name, the question. I found my mother in the kitchen, stirring an enormous pot of pepper soup, tears streaming down her face as much from the onions as from grief. She pulled me aside, her grip surprisingly strong. "Your cousins are both here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mako arrived from Wari yesterday. Austin has been here for a week, never left his father's side. But now..." She trailed off, shaking her head. "Now what?" I pressed. She looked around, ensuring we were alone. "Your Uncle Zako's people have been making noise. Quietly, you understand. They say Mako is not Efosa's son. They say he belongs to Zako. They say the rites must be performed by a son of Efosa's blood, or the ancestors will not accept the sacrifice. They say. They say Austin should do it," I finished for her. My mother nodded, her face a mask of anguish. "And others say tradition is tradition. Mako was born to Izu while she was married to Efosa. By every custom, every law, he is the first son. To deny him is to invite a curse. The family is splitting, Osiro. Even now, with your uncle's body not yet cold, they are choosing sides." I stepped out into the compound, into the humidity and the tension. I saw Austin first. He stood near the entrance to his father's house, accepting condolences with a grave dignity that belied his 30 years. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with Efosa's intense eyes and easy smile, though today the smile was absent. Men clustered around him, uncles and cousins from his mother's side, their body language protective, proprietary. He was the heir apparent, and they were his court. Then I saw Mako. He sat apart, on a low wooden stool near the wall of the family parlor, slightly in the shadows. He was thinner than I remembered, his face more lined, the thoughtful quiet of his youth now settled into something heavier, more watchful. His wife sat beside him, her hand on his arm. No court surrounded him. Only a few older men, distant relatives who remembered the old ways, sat nearby, their presence a silent endorsement of tradition. The contrast was stark, a living diagram of the fracture threatening to consume us. The days leading to the funeral were a masterclass in indirection. Everyone talked, but no one spoke. Relatives arrived from Warri, from Lagos, from as far away as Abuja and London. Each arrival shifted the delicate balance of power. There were meetings behind closed doors, the murmur of voices late into the night, the sudden silences that fell when younger family members approached. The elders, the titled men with their weathered faces and walking sticks, were the worst. They spoke in proverbs, in riddles, in allusions to history and custom that left everyone more confused than before. The yam that grows in another man's farm, one of them intoned during a gathering on the second night, does it not still belong to the one who planted it? Unless, another countered, stroking his chin, the farm itself was given to the new farmer, with all that was in it. But the seed, the first persisted, the seed remembers its original soil. I watched Mako's face as these verbal duels unfolded. He sat motionless, his expression unreadable, but I saw his hands clench on his knees. I watched Austin, too, who listened with the patient attentiveness of a man waiting for his turn to speak, surrounded by advisors whispering in his ear. The intrigue thickened. Auntie Osaragi, Ifosa's eldest sister, arrived from Warri with a contingent of relatives who had known Zako. Their arrival shifted the atmosphere. They did not speak against Mako openly, but they spoke often of Zako, of his generosity, of his untimely death, of how he had loved Izu and how cruelly fate had separated them. They spoke of blood, of the unbreakable bond between a man and his seed. Each word was a pebble dropped into still water, the ripples spreading outward. Izu, Mako's mother, moved through this minefield with the grace of a woman who had spent decades navigating impossible terrain. She was the widow of both brothers, the keeper of the most dangerous secret, the living bridge between the dead and the living. Her face was a permanent mask of composed grief, but I saw the toll it took in the way her hands trembled when she thought no one was looking. She spoke to everyone, embraced everyone, but her eyes rarely left Mako. She was protecting him in the only way she could, by her presence, by her silence, by her unwavering stance as the matriarch who had loved both her husbands and would not, could not, choose between her sons. But the choice was coming. The day of the final rites approached, and still no decision had been made. The elders met in emergency session, sequestered in the parlor for hours. We could hear their voices rising and falling, the thump of a walking stick on the floor, the occasional burst of angry speech in deep, archaic Benin dialect that few of the younger generation fully understood. Outside, the compound held its breath. It was on the third day, with the funeral proper less than 24 hours away, that the ghost of Zako was finally summoned. An elder from his mother's family arrived, a man so old he seemed carved from the same ancient wood as the Oba's palace doors. He did not enter through the main gate. He came through the back, escorted by drummers playing a rhythm no one had heard in decades, a funeral dirge for a man who had died before his time. The sound cut through the compound like a knife, and everyone fell silent. He was led to the parlor where the elders sat. He did not greet anyone. He simply walked to the center of the room, poured a libation of gin on the floor, and began to speak. He spoke of Zako's death, of the pregnancy Izu carried, of the agreement made between families, of the duty Ifosa had fulfilled. But then he spoke of something else. He spoke of the spirit world, of the restless dead, of a man who had died without seeing his son, without naming him, without passing on his blessings. He spoke of the danger of leaving such a spirit unappeased, of the calamities that could befall a family that ignored the claims of blood. Mako's blood is Zako's blood, he said, his voice a dry rustle like harmattan leaves. Zako's spirit cries out for recognition. If another man's son performs the rites for Efosa, if the ancestors see a stranger standing in the place of a son, they will turn away. The sacrifice will not be accepted. The dead will wander. And the living will suffer. The room was silent. No one dared speak. The old man had done what no one else had been willing to do. He had named the ghost, dragged it into the light, and given it a voice. The fear that had been a low hum became a roar. You could see it in the eyes of the elders, the sudden pallor on their faces. They were not just afraid of a family quarrel. They were afraid of death, real death, spiritual death, the kind that could wither crops, bring sickness, haunt dreams, and unravel the fabric of generations. That night, the compound divided completely. Austin's supporters gathered in one wing, their voices low and urgent, plotting their next move. Mako's few advocates clustered in another, their arguments rooted in custom, in the sanctity of the marriage that had made Mako Efosa's son. The rest of us, the majority, moved between them like refugees in our own family, carrying food and water, offering meaningless comfort, praying for a resolution that seemed increasingly impossible. I found myself with Austin late that night. He was alone, sitting in his father's study, surrounded by the books Efosa had loved. His face was drawn, the confident air replaced by a young man grappling with an impossible weight. "Cousin," he said when I entered, his voice tired. "You've been watching all this. What do you think?" I sat across from him, choosing my words carefully. "I think your father loved you both. I think he knew this moment would come and dreaded it." Austin nodded slowly. "He tried to talk to me, you know. In his last weeks. He kept starting sentences he couldn't finish. 'Austin, about your brother.' And then he would stop, close his eyes, and wave his hand as if dismissing the thought. I think he wanted to tell me something, but he couldn't find the words. Or maybe he was afraid of the words. What do you think he wanted to say?" Austin looked at me, and for a moment, the mask slipped. I saw the boy beneath the man, the son who had lost his father and was now losing his brother, his family, his sense of place. I think he wanted me to step aside. I think he wanted Mako to perform the rites. But he couldn't say it. He couldn't tell his own son, his blood son, to give up his birthright. So he died with it unsaid, and left us to tear each other apart. The confession hung in the air between us. I had no comfort to offer, no wisdom to impart. I simply sat with him in the silence, two cousins bound by blood and history, watching our family splinter. The morning of the funeral dawned gray and heavy, the sky pressed low with unshed rain. The compound filled early, overflowing with mourners, with dignitaries, with curious onlookers who had heard the rumors and come to witness the spectacle. The air vibrated with tension. Every conversation stopped when Mako or Austin appeared. Every movement was watched, every gesture interpreted. The elders assembled before the family shrine, a small structure near the center of the compound where the carved wooden staffs of our ancestors stood in silent witness. The chief priest, a wizened man with ritual chalk marks on his face, waited with the patience of stone. The moment had come. Someone had to step forward. Someone had to lift the earth, pour the libation, speak the names. The question hung in the air like the sword of a vengeful god. And then, something happened that no one expected. Izu stepped forward. She walked slowly, deliberately, from the women's quarters, through the crowd that parted before her like water before a boat. She was dressed in the deep purple of full mourning, her head wrapped in a white geli, her face set in an expression of terrible resolve. She walked past Mako, who rose from his seat, his eyes widening. She walked past Austin, who stepped forward as if to intercept her, then stopped, frozen by something in her gaze. She walked to the center of the compound, to the space before the shrine, and she stopped. "The dead will not be ignored," she said, her voice clear and strong, cutting through the murmuring crowd. I have kept silence for 30 years. I have been wife to 2 brothers, mother to 2 sons, keeper of a secret that has poisoned this family like a slow-acting venom. Today, the poison ends. She turned to face the elders. Zuko was my husband. He died before our son was born. Ephosa, my husband, took me and my unborn child into his house and gave us his name. He did this out of love for his brother and duty to our family. He raised Mako as his own. He loved him. But Mako's blood is Zuko's blood. And Zuko has waited 30 years to be acknowledged. She turned to Mako, and her eyes filled with tears. My son, you are the son of Zuko. You were conceived in love, born in grief, raised in grace. Your father's spirit has waited for this day. He will wait no longer. She turned to Austin, and her voice softened. And you, Austin, are the son of Ephosa, born of his body, the image of his soul. Your father loved you with a love that had no shadows. He wanted you to have everything. But he also wanted justice for his brother. He died with that conflict unresolved, and it has fallen to us to resolve it. She faced the shrine, raised her hands to the sky, and spoke the words that would change everything. Zuko, my husband, your son is here. He will perform the rites for his father's brother, for the man who raised him, for the family that sheltered him. But he does so as your son. His blood acknowledges your blood. His hands lift the earth in your name as well as Ephosa's. Let the ancestors witness. Let the living accept. The truth is spoken. The poison is drained. For a long, terrible moment, no one moved. The silence was absolute, a physical weight pressing down on the compound. Then, slowly, the chief priest nodded. He looked at the elders, who exchanged glances, then nodded in turn. He looked at Mako and gestured. Mako walked forward as if in a dream. His feet seemed to barely touch the earth. He reached the shrine, took the ritual implements from the priest, and began the rites. His voice, when he spoke the names of the ancestors, was steady, but I saw his hands shake. He poured the libation. He lifted the earth. He spoke the words that sent both his fathers into the realm of the ancestors. Austin watched. He stood perfectly still, his face a mask, but I saw the muscle jump in his jaw, saw his hands clench at his sides. His supporters stirred, muttered, but no one moved to intervene. The truth had been spoken. The ghost had been named. The rites were being performed. When it was over, when the final prayers were said and the drums began their slow, funereal rhythm, Mako turned from the shrine. He walked not to his wife, not to his mother, but to Austin. He stopped before his brother, and for a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Then Mako spoke, his voice low, meant only for Austin. I am Zuko's son, he said. But I am also your brother. I performed the rites for our father for Ephosa, who raised me. Nothing changes that. Nothing changes us. Austin's mask cracked. His eyes glistened, but he did not weep. He nodded once, a short, sharp motion, and then he turned and walked away, into his father's house, into the silence of his grief. The compound slowly came back to life. People began to move, to speak, to eat, and drink. The funeral continued, as funerals must, because the living must go on living. But something had shifted. The truth, buried for 3 decades, had been unearthed. Mako had performed the rites, and in doing so, had claimed his place as Zuko's son while honoring Ephosa as his father. Austin had been displaced, but he had also been freed from a burden he had never asked to carry, the burden of being the sole heir to a legacy tangled in secrets. I found my mother later, sitting alone in the kitchen, the pots now cold and empty. She looked at me, and for the first time since Ephosa's death, she smiled a small, tired, genuine smile. It is done, she said. The truth is out. Now the healing can begin. Or the war can begin in earnest. We will see. I thought about her words as I walked through the compound that evening, past the clusters of relatives still debating, still analyzing, still taking sides. The truth had been spoken, yes. But truth is not always a healer. Sometimes it is a scalpel, cutting away the infected tissue, leaving a wound that must heal on its own. Sometimes it is a key, opening doors that can never be closed again. Mako sat with his mother, their heads together, speaking in low tones. The weight on his shoulders seemed lighter, but his eyes held a new wariness, the awareness of what he had gained and what he had lost. Austin's door remained closed. His supporters had dispersed, their arguments silenced by the finality of what had occurred. But silence is not acceptance, and the night held its breath, waiting to see what the morning would bring. As for me, I returned to Lagos, to Akate, to the noise and chaos that usually drowns out the whispers of the past. But the whispers followed me. They always will. Because the story is not over. The funeral is done, the rites performed, the truth spoken. But the inheritance, the land in Benin, the properties in Irwa, the valuable plots in Akate remains undivided. The question of who gets what, of how Zako's son and Ifosa's son will divide the legacy of a man who was father to both, hangs over the family like the Harmattan haze, obscuring, confusing, waiting to precipitate into something new. And beneath it all, the ancestors watch. Zako, finally acknowledged, rests easier. Ifosa, his secret laid bare, waits to see what his sons will do. And the rest of us, the cousins, the aunts, the uncles, the children of this fractured house, wait with them, knowing that the War of the Roses is not won in a single battle. It is won in the long, slow work of peace, in the choices made when the drums fall silent and the mourners go home, in the quiet courage of brothers who must learn to see each other not as rivals but as the only family they have left. The Harmattan dust settled over Benin City in the weeks following Ifosa's funeral, a fine grey powder that coated everything: the leaves of the mango tree, the corrugated iron roofs, the hearts of the family left behind. The truth had been spoken, the rites performed, and for a brief, fragile moment, there was peace. Mako returned to Warri with his wife, Alice, and their 3 children. Austin remained in Benin, overseeing his father's estate, meeting with lawyers, trying to make sense of the legacy that was now his to share. The compound, once filled with the tension of competing claims, fell into an uneasy quiet, like a battlefield after the retreat of armies, waiting to see if the war would resume. I watched from Lagos, receiving reports through phone calls and whispered conversations. My mother, ever the keeper of family intelligence, would call me weekly with updates that grew increasingly troubling. At first, it was small things: Mako had not attended a family meeting in Benin, Austin had sent a message that went unanswered. Then the reports grew darker. There were words spoken in anger, accusations made in confidence, lines drawn in sand that the Harmattan winds threatened to erase but instead only obscured, making the boundaries harder to see until someone stumbled over them. At the center of it all was Alice. I had known Alice since she married Mako, a decade ago now. She was from Sapil, a riverine woman with the fierce beauty of the creek's high cheekbones, skin the color of dark honey, eyes that missed nothing. She had married Mako when he was still finding his footing in the world, a young man burdened by the unspoken weight of his origins, working as a civil servant in Warri while dreaming of something more. Alice had ambition. It was one of the things Mako loved about her, the way she pushed him, believed in him, refused to let him settle for the small life the world seemed to have assigned him. But ambition, like fire, warms and illuminates, but if unchecked, it consumes everything in its path. From the beginning, Alice had viewed Austin with suspicion. It started, as these things often do, with small observations that curdled into certainties. She noticed how Austin's name came up in family conversations, always with a particular weight, a deference that Mako's name never seemed to command. She noticed how the properties in Benin, the ones everyone knew would be divided, were discussed as if Austin had a natural right to the choicest ones. She noticed how the elders, even after the funeral, still gravitated toward Austin, seeking his opinion, acknowledging his presence in ways they did not acknowledge Mako's. "It's because he is the blood son," she told Mako one night, her voice low and urgent, as they lay in their bedroom in Wari, the ceiling fan struggling against the humidity. "They respect him because he is Efosa's real son. You, they tolerate. You are the placeholder, the one they used to appease the ancestors. Now that the rites are done, they will push you aside." Mako, tired from a long day at the office, sighed. "Alice, that's not true. The elders accepted me performing the rites. Your own mother spoke the truth. It's done." "Accepted you?" Alice sat up, her eyes flashing in the dim light. "They had no choice. Your mother forced their hand. But do you think they accept you? Do you think Austin accepts you? He watched you perform his father's funeral, watched you take what should have been his, and you think he has simply moved on?" "He is my brother." "He is your cousin," Alice corrected, her voice sharp. "Your half-brother at best, and only by the accident of your mother's marriage. His blood is Efosa's blood. Yours is Zako's. And blood speaks, Mako. It speaks louder than tradition, louder than your mother's speeches, louder than any rites performed in front of witnesses." This was the seed Alice planted, and she watered it with the consistency of devotion. Every phone call from Benin became evidence. Every mention of Austin's name in conversation became a test of Mako's loyalty to himself. Every family gathering Mako could not attend became a conspiracy from which he was excluded. "Mako, did you hear?" she would say, returning from the market with news passed through the women's network. "Austin has hired a surveyor for the Irwa land. He is marking boundaries without consulting you." "Perhaps he is just preparing for the division," Mako would reply, his voice uncertain. "We will need surveys eventually." Preparing for division? Or preparing to take what he wants and leave you with the scraps? When have you ever been consulted about anything? When has anyone from Benin called to ask your opinion? The calls did come, of course. I made them myself, and so did my mother, and so did Auntie Izu, who called her son every Sunday without fail. But Alice intercepted these calls, or listened to Mako's end of them, and interpreted every conversation through her lens of suspicion. What did she want? She would ask after Mako hung up from his mother. She wanted to know when we are coming to Benin for the holidays. And? Did she mention Austin? Is he bringing his family? Will you be expected to share a compound with him, pretend everything is normal while he schemes behind your back? She didn't mention Austin. Of course she didn't. She is protecting him. She always protects him. She spoke the truth at the funeral, yes, but whose side do you think she is really on? She was married to Efosa for 30 years. She bore his son. You think she loves you more than she loves Austin? You think her blood doesn't know its own? This was Alice's genius, her ability to take the most innocent interactions and twist them into evidence of conspiracy, to make Mako doubt the love of his own mother, to isolate him from everyone who might offer a different perspective. And Mako, already carrying the deep wound of a lifetime of unspoken belonging, was fertile ground for her suspicions. The first public crack appeared 6 months after the funeral, at a family meeting called to discuss the division of Efosa's properties. The meeting was held in Benin, in the parlor where the elders had gathered during those tense days before the rites. Austin had organized it, sending invitations to all the relevant parties: Mako, the elders, the lawyers, the family heads. He had done everything by the book, careful to include his brother in every step. But Mako did not come. Instead, he sent a letter, drafted by a lawyer in Wari, stating that he could not attend until certain clarifications were made about the ownership of the properties. The letter did not accuse directly, but the implication was clear. Mako did not trust the process, did not trust his brother, did not trust anyone in Benin to act in his interest. The parlor erupted. The elders, who had worked so hard to broker peace, felt slapped in the face by Mako's absence and his lawyer's letter. Austin sat in silence as the accusations flew against Mako, against Alice, against the outside influences poisoning the family. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, but I could hear the hurt beneath it. I invited my brother as an equal, he said. I prepared all the documents to share with him, to go through together. I wanted us to do this as a family, as our father would have wanted. He has chosen not to come. He has chosen to send lawyers instead of coming himself. I don't know what I have done to deserve this distrust, but I will wait. I will wait for my brother to come to me, to speak to me as a brother, not as an adversary. The meeting ended without resolution. The properties remained undivided. The rift, once a hairline crack, became a chasm. I called Mako that night. He answered on the third ring, his voice guarded. Cousin, I said. I heard about the meeting. Then you heard that I was not there. I heard that you sent a lawyer. Mako, what is happening? This is not you. There was a long pause. I could hear Alice's voice in the background, a murmur, then silence. Mako. I have to protect myself, Osiro. No one else will. Protect yourself from what? From Austin? From your own family? We are your family, Mako. Your mother is here. Your aunts, your uncles. We all want what is best for you. Do you? His voice sharpened. Or do you want what is best for Austin? Everyone in Benin bows to him. Everyone defers to him. I performed the rites, but nothing has changed. He is still the favored son. I am still the afterthought. This is Alice talking, Mako. Not you. This is me talking. For the first time in my life, this is me talking. I have spent 40 years being whatever everyone else needed me to be: Afosa's son, Zako's son, the quiet one, the compliant one. No more. I have a wife who loves me, children who need me. I will not let Austin take what is mine because everyone is too afraid to tell him no. The conversation went nowhere after that. Mako was polite, distant, unreachable. He had built a wall, and Alice was the architect. The months that followed were a cascade of fractures. Alice, emboldened by Mako's compliance, escalated her campaign. She began calling other family members, spreading her version of events with the dedication of an evangelist. To Auntie Osaragi, she spoke of Austin's arrogance, his assumption of superiority. To my mother, she hinted at documents being hidden, assets being moved. To anyone who would listen, she painted a picture of a conspiracy so vast, so intricate, that only the most vigilant could survive it. Mako's wife is dangerous, my mother said to me during one of our calls. She is dividing the family with her tongue. People are starting to believe her, or at least to repeat what she says, and the repetition makes it seem true. Austin hears these things. He is hurt, but he refuses to fight back. He says fighting would prove her right, would make him the aggressor he is not. But his silence is being interpreted as guilt, as acceptance of her accusations. What does Auntie Izu say? My mother sighed. Your auntie is trapped. She loves both her sons. She sees what Alice is doing, but when she tries to talk to Mako, Alice intercepts. When she calls, Alice says he is not available. When she visits, Alice makes sure the visit is short, uncomfortable. Mako is being isolated, and he doesn't even see it. Or perhaps he does see it, and he chooses it. Perhaps being isolated with Alice feels safer than being included with a family he has never fully trusted. The situation deteriorated further when the issue of the Arcade properties arose. Ifosa had owned 3 plots in Lagos, in the heart of Arcade, land that had appreciated exponentially since he bought it decades ago when the area was still swamp and scrub. Now it sat in the shadow of towering buildings, prime real estate worth millions. The division of these properties required careful negotiation, legal expertise, and above all, trust between the brothers. Austin proposed a meeting in Lagos, neutral ground, away from the pressures of Benin and Warri. He would bring his lawyer, Mako could bring his, and they would sit down with a mediator to work out a fair division. It was a reasonable offer, a peace offering. Mako refused. Instead, through his lawyer, he made a counter-proposal: all 3 plots should be sold, and the proceeds divided equally. This seemed fair on its surface, but the implications were devastating. The Arcade properties were not just assets, they were legacy. Ifosa had bought them with the vision of building something for his grandchildren, a foothold in the booming commercial capital. Selling them would erase that vision, turn a generation's work into cash that would be spent and forgotten. Austin, through his lawyer, proposed an alternative: 1 plot each, with the third held in trust for the family, to be managed collectively for the benefit of all descendants. It was a compromise, a way to honor their father's vision while still providing for both brothers. Mako's lawyer rejected it. Alice, it emerged, had convinced Mako that the trust was a trick, a way for Austin to maintain control over the most valuable asset while appearing generous. She had spun a narrative so complex, so convincing, that Mako could no longer see the simple truth: his brother was trying to find a way forward, not a way to win. The breaking point came at Christmas. Every year, the family gathered in Benin for the holidays. It was a tradition as old as any in our lineage, a time when cousins reunited, when children ran through the compound, when the past was honored and the future welcomed. This year, Austin sent a personal invitation to Mako, handwritten, delivered by a trusted cousin. It spoke of their father, of the importance of family, of a hope that the new year could bring healing. It was, by any measure, a sincere and loving gesture. Alice intercepted the letter. She read it, then sat Mako down and interpreted it for him. The warmth, she said, was manipulation. The references to their father were guilt-tripping. The hope for healing was a trap, designed to lure him to Benin, where he would be pressured into accepting unfavorable terms. The only safe response, she argued, was no response at all.